Hello and good afternoon and welcome to the Basketball England. I'm going to call it the conduct discussion this afternoon. I'm really wanted to try and steer away from the word behaviour. Some of you know that I am ex-education and we tend to kind of talk about it in that way, but actually in sport, I think the use of the word conduct is far more positive and is clearer about us setting expectations and what we want from players. So again, I'm Lois Newton. I am going to hand you over to my guest this afternoon, who I'm absolutely thrilled has joined me. So Sergio, do you want to kind of introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Lois and Basketball England, for the opportunity to share with the wider community and to spend time chatting to you today. Um, I'm Sergio Lara-Bercial. If you want, I've got two hats, if you want. In my day job, I'm a professor of sports coaching at Leeds Beckett University in Leeds. And my role there is I work in the undergraduate degree and the postgraduate degree, lecturing, doing research, doing consultancy in anything to do with the sports coaching, especially within the youth sport theme, really. But by night or by evening, I'm a coach. I've been a basketball coach for, I think, this is my 28th year or something like this.
That's a long time, Sergio. It's a
It is a
long
long
time.
time, started early, at the Manchester Magic and Mystics in Manchester. Um, and I'm
It is the
also
best city in the UK. I am just going to point out you are talking to a Manchester girl.
well, I am an adopted Mancunian, really. I've been here 24 years now, although, as you can tell by the accent, I'm from a little bit further south,
Just a tiny
in
bit.
Madrid. Um, but yeah, I'm also very fortunate to be one of the members of the board of trustees at the club. I've taken that position over the last 6 months, after 20 plus years there as a coach. Um, and maybe just for reference, really, I'm also a parent at the club. My two children are involved, which probably might be something that we discuss at some point.
Yeah, and actually, do you know what, Sergio? That's a nice thing to add, isn't it? Because I think if you sometimes perhaps as a non-parent, you can it might be easier to lose sight. I don't know. I might be wrong in that. I can certainly speaking from my own experience in education. I'm also a parent, and it does kind of help you to think about it from both perspectives a little bit sometimes. So I think I think that's really really useful. Um, I think when I was thinking about what we were going to discuss, I've kind of bracketed it a little bit, which we can tweak as we go along. So I'd like us to kind of think about how we can set the tone at club and what are the things that a club can do to make sure that everybody's clear about the standards that are expected. Think about how clubs, if they're presented with situations that are a little bit challenging and perhaps conduct isn't where it should be, what are the things they can do to manage those, which leads, I think, really nicely onto just looking at what they can do to make sure they're involving parents, because that's often quite key, I think, in some of those discussions. What they can do, post anything that's been a bit challenging in terms of the positive steps that they can take. And then we'll have a bit of a quick sum up. But I know that there'll be things that you will come at, I suppose, just from the sports field that will be different to perhaps even the way I think about it. So I think that's why it's really important to hear predominantly from you rather than me. So if
Mhm.
we're setting the tone, Sergio, what does that, how do you view that and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. But for me, there's a couple of things there, really. The If you want the first one, before we get into the more practical elements around developing a code of conduct and how do we communicate that, um, I think at the end of the day, the people at the club that are, and I'm going to call it, and I'm not going to apologize for it, but customer facing, if you want,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, because I like to think about the players and their families as our customers.
Yeah.
And we are delivering a product for them. And we want that product to be the best it can be. Um, so the people that are customer facing, coaches, team managers, club officials,
Yeah.
um, a big start is to lead by example. I
Yeah.
think um, if we understand the type of image that we want to portray or the way we would like people to behave while they, when they're in the club, that's anybody, players, parents, referees, opposition teams, our own teams, obviously. Um, we have to start there. I think the way you behave sometimes is much more important than any written document,
Yeah.
um, and has a much more greater impact, and it's more sustainable. Now that behavior, if you want, is informed by your philosophy of how you want to run the club. Um, and that's going to be, if you want, manifested or put in black and white through some kind of code of conduct.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
now, so we have a code of conduct at the club. I was saying to you before we started recording that we're actually in the process of revisiting that because it's a relatively old code of conduct. Um, we think that we've moved on a little bit and things have changed, so we need to freshen it up a little bit. But we have a code of conduct, and that's a code of conduct that everybody has to commit to at the beginning of the year, and that means signing a piece of paper that says that you've read it, understood it, and committing to it. Um, and 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 the main thing for me though is that if that's all we do with codes of conduct, they have a short lifespan really, because if all we do is that every September, like now, right, everybody's going through the licensing system, um, trying to get everybody ready to start the league in a few weeks. And at this point, the clubs that have those codes of conduct will ask people to, as you're doing the license, please sign the code of conduct. Um, but if that's all we do, that doesn't really go a long way
Anything.
because
Yeah.
no, people won't even remember they even signed it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's two things really that need to happen. One is that we have to spend time with people, whether that's parent or players, in understanding what's in that code of conduct, because sometimes the codes of conduct are written in a very generic way.
Yeah.
In but what does that really mean for our daily behaviors? What are it's like sometimes like when we talk about values. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we talk about values, but what does that look like
Yeah.
in the real world? And what does that look like when you're down by 30 points? What does
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah.
What does that look like when your child has only played 3 minutes in that game?
Yeah.
What does that look like as a player when the referee gives you a bad call, or as a coach? Okay, and there'll be referees listening to me thinking, "Oh my God, Sergio, don't say that." So I think that's a big part that we need to then spend time communicating this code of conduct with them. But really, that idea of, I mean, we like to talk about co-constructing the code of conduct with the parents and the players, or co-interpreting it, if you want,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That we say, well, what does this mean to you? What do you think this means? And give us examples of this. When is this going to be important? In what kind of situation?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that to me is a good starting point, because I think it gives people a chance to own it, to challenge it as well. Because some things in codes of conduct might be challenging for people because they might have different beliefs.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you got something in your code of conduct around um, we want to provide equal participation, but someone thinks that only the best players should play.
Good play.
That's something that has to be discussed, and those might be group discussions, or at least you've got a chance to say to people, well, if there's something that you're not comfortable with and you want to discuss individually, let's just pick that up outside this meeting, right?
Yeah.
But it's a really good discussion, because then you can keep going back to it. When something happens, um, we can always say, well, I mean, where does this fit with the things that we said 2 months ago? And I think that's a really, really important thing to do.
I think to kind of listening to you, Sergio, and it's really nice to hear actually some of the words that you use that I'm sure you're very aware of, but it's when you talk about the philosophy of the club, the values, and you're absolutely right. Anybody can sign a piece of paper and kind of it sits on a shelf somewhere and nobody ever looks at it ever again until the next year. But I think it's that, what are we modeling? What are the behaviors and the conduct standards that we're modeling on a day-to-day basis? What are the values of the club? And it's that idea of what does it, in some respect, the way I interpret that a little bit is how does it feel? How does it feel when you walk into that hall, when you walk into that area? Does it feel like a good, say, fun, space to be? And I think a good, fun space to be is somewhere where everybody's respected, everybody kind of knows what to expect of each other, and there's no big surprises that might be less than positive. And I think once you start to embed that idea of it's not just about a piece of paper, but it is about the values and it is about the way it just feels when you walk in, and it's got, it should feel welcoming. That's how it should be. And that comes from the top, doesn't it? It comes from the kind of the top down around people modeling those behaviors, which then other people they just start to emulate. Young people will start to emulate it because they can see that that's a good way to do things. And I think you've got to be careful with this, because there will be people out there, totally understandably, who will turn around and go, yeah, but there are some that really always push the boundaries, and of course there are, but sometimes people push the boundaries for a very wide variety of reasons, and sometimes the sort of slogans that you see are those that push the boundaries are sometimes the people that need your attention the most. So sometimes there are reasons and whys and wherefores. And to be fair, sometimes, that's me at the end of the day. If it's been a rubbish day, it's just everything, life's just not gone great today, then we can all have that experience of, so it's just being open also to understanding why, people might behave or express themselves in particular ways.
Yeah, and I think, to me that's a fundamental point, because like you say, we've all been there, and some of us may be more or less aware of when we start behaving like that, because
Yeah.
we may have more or less life experience, if you want.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult for a 12-year-old to understand where they are emotionally, okay?
Yeah.
Or a 15-year-old, or anybody, to be honest, right? One thing that we've always tried to do, and I'm probably talking more about myself now than just wider at the club. Like you say, I think everybody has a reason to behave. And what I think it's really important is that we don't just shoot from the hip all the time, and that we take time to just not to just have a knee-jerk reaction to anything that happens. And that could be anything. That could be a reaction from a coach, a reaction from a parent, from a player, and to take a couple of seconds to try and see where that's coming from.
Yeah.
And because a lot of the times, I think we misinterpret frustration, sadness, uh, hopelessness, with bad behavior. And even if the manifestation might be a negative behavior, me, the underlying root of that behavior is really important, because that's what you need to try and fix. And and throwing someone out of the club because of that is not going to fix that. It's probably actually going to make it worse. Okay, and that's not to say that we should let people run riot. Okay, that's not the idea. But I think it's important that we try to get to the bottom of why people are behaving in a particular way.
Yeah.
And that might lead you down different paths. Okay, with a child, it might lead you to some sort of agreement with the child of, look, every time you feel like that, this is what we could do to kind of start to bring you down to a level where
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can behave again. Like you would do
Strategies.
in school. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. If it is a parent, for example, maybe like, actually you need to have a chat with them about and try and understand where their behavior is coming from. I've always said, really, like, And we'll come back to this later on, I guess, when we talk about parents in more detail. But we have to stop looking at parents as if they are the enemy. And I'm talking about as a coach now or as a club. We tend to really think that the parents are always out there to get us. And the reality is that all parents want the best thing for their child. And sometimes they don't quite understand what that is. Sometimes actually we don't really understand the child as well as they do. And therefore they should have a say in how that experience can be made better for their child because they have a much bigger knowledge of how that child operates. Okay. And so it has to be a an open door in terms of communicating, and it's much more than an open door. It's a proactive open door where we have to really try and proactively build a relationship with the parents and the child, try and understand every child because every child is different. And then that, going back to the point that I was trying to make initially, that might allow you to then reinterpret some of those behaviors
Yeah.
as, okay, this is disruptive, but it's not malintentioned.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's something that I have to just support this child to get better at controlling this type of behavior, or this parent, as opposed to we have to get rid of this child. Uh, and I think that's where I'd like to always start with. Just take a step back and I just try to look at the situation from more than one perspective.
Yeah. And I think it's nice to hear you say that, Sergio, and you've pretty much just covered my next heading, which is challenging situations, because almost I've got no doubt that, over the period of time that you've been involved in basketball, you will have been faced, at this club, wherever else, with challenging situations and like you say, behavior or conduct can be such an emotive thing sometimes. And it's one of those areas that people can just knee-jerk reaction because they just do, because it can be quite emotive. And if somebody is just perhaps not following the rules, or they're persistently not doing as asked, then it can feel it can almost feel quite emotive, but be a bit personal as well. And why aren't they doing as I'm saying? There must be something wrong with the way I'm doing it. So that in itself can escalate that conversation, because there's a feeling of, well, they do what that person says over there, but they're not doing what I say. So I obviously need to shout louder. And it's all of that kind of feeling, and all those thought processes that go in to try and manage some of those challenging situations. So I think to hear you say, that not everybody gets it right all the time, because they don't, but B, it is very much about just take a breath, step back, and let's have a think about why this has happened. And sometimes, it's the ownership is on the other person, and that might be because they're just not quite competent at totally regulating, how they manage themselves on a day-to-day basis. Some of that ownership might lie with us. Some of that might have just been the way that we've approached this person today, and we've just not come at it the right way. And it's then being big enough to go, do you know what? I went a bit over the top there. I approached that, and I'm really sorry. Can we start again? Which can feel, and I also think, from my own background, that can feel like you're admitting that sometimes admitting that you were wrong is a big thing to do, isn't it? It can feel like a big thing to do, but the more we realize that actually sometimes we all slip up, and sometimes we all don't get it quite right, and actually turning around and saying, let's unwind, let's start this again, and see if we can manage it and take that step back, is really, really helpful. And I suppose to pair that back to what you were kind of talking about right at the start around leading by example, we've all got to be big enough to kind of say, we've messed up here, haven't we? Or I've messed up. Let's do this again. So I think to hear you kind of saying that, so I think it wouldn't really matter what challenging situation I presented with you now. If your stop response is take a breath and think about it, then you're probably on the start of the right lines, aren't you?
Yeah, but it is quite liberating as well when you stop thinking. You mentioned something that is really important. we have a tendency to take things really personal,
Yeah.
okay? Because things matter to us. Because normally by the time we come to the basketball club in the evening, we've done a full day's work doing something else, and then we drove for an hour and a half in traffic. And by the time you get there, your brain is somewhere else, okay, potentially. Um, because we're volunteers, and I mean, I've heard this so many times, and I've said it before, like, I don't need this. I don't come here for this, right? But actually, you come here for this. That's part of the role. It's part
Yeah.
of the job, really. Basketball is just an excuse. We're just dealing with people. I always say that to my students that we don't coach a sport. We coach people,
Yeah.
and we have different sports as the vehicle that we use to do that. Um, but if you can, first, don't not take it personal. Second, try to understand why the other person is behaving that way. And third, be very clear that the only person that can do something about it is you, and therefore you have to think about, okay, how can I help this person, right? Okay, and don't get me wrong, that's not to excuse anyone. I've had to deal with situations that were completely out of order, where the person that was doing it was completely aware that it was out of order and still did it, and we're just trying to get away with it. And those are very different situations, but I find that those are few and far between, really. I think a lot of the stuff that we see is much more around either people not understanding the implications of doing something because they can see beyond themselves, or they can put themselves in someone else's shoes, um, or people just like you were saying, not being able to self-regulate.
Regulate. Yeah.
Um, and that applies to everyone, and I put my hand up. I've had
Me too.
moments while coaching games that I've just completely not been able to self-regulate. But going back to the point about being big enough to admit it, I always say two things really. One, whenever you do something that you shouldn't have done or said something you shouldn't have said, the moment you realize that, apologize, because that goes a long way
Yeah.
before it becomes any bigger. Um,
It
and
often
also,
stops it becomes becoming a bit bigger as well. I think that.
oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. And also have some safety mechanisms, some fail safe really. So um, I always say to my assistant coach, look, you know the kind of person that I want to be when I'm coaching. So if I start doing something that I shouldn't be doing,
Tell
please
me.
let me know. Tell me straight away. And we have such a good relationship that if he says that to me, I know I must be doing it. Okay. Um, it's not that he's trying to be clever or anything. And we do the same to each other in that sense. So having those, because again, just accepting that you're not going to be perfect, having those mechanisms to say, well, look, first, apologize. Second, have someone else looking over you and rescuing you when you need to. Because again, that's kind of what you want to do with the players or the parents. Like you want to let them know, look, that's kind of not what we're here to do. Tell me why you're doing that, and tell me how I can help you so that doesn't happen again. Um, that I think that's where the majority of the issues are. And when someone is deliberately trying to be bad,
Because
to
what
harm
about those
people,
people, Sergio? Because
yeah,
you've touched on it yourself. Those people who just are just being, for whatever reason, just being naughty. They're just
yeah.
not going to follow the rules today. What's your general kind of, manner, I suppose, at your club? How do you deal with those people? What do you do?
I mean, it depends on the severity of the
Yeah.
incident, right? So it ranges from having a conversation with that young person or that parent, or with the two of them, obviously. Having that conversation as early as possible. I'm a big believer in, uh, as you say, nipping things on the butt,
Good.
um, because um, because otherwise they fester and they end up becoming much bigger. Um, and a lot of the times, a lot of things are misunderstandings really. So doing that early, um, but it can range to the point where, unfortunately, you might have to actually temporarily suspend someone and conduct an investigation, a formal investigation into an incident. Okay. Um, Again, those are few and far between, in my experience, and thank God for that. But to me, the biggest thing is dealing with things early. I know sometimes in kind of in how do we deal with negative behavior. We talk about what ignore the behavior and it goes away, if you can, an attention-seeking behavior, and we do that as well. And I think that always the line is you can ignore something unless it's putting others at risk,
Yeah.
or becoming so disruptive that it's taking away from the experience of the others. Okay, in which case you move to step two. You have to have a conversation with that person. I've always tried not to remove children from sessions in the middle of a session. I've done best I could. I've tried to do that. I think not coaching on your own is a good thing if everybody can have someone coaching with them, even if someone doesn't have to be a great basketball coach. It could be just a parent that is there to support you when something like that happens. That can take someone to one side and have a quiet word with someone, that can maybe have a word with the family of that person if they're in the building. Say, well, going back to the point of parents know their children. Like, if he does that at home, how do you deal with it?
Yeah.
Is that typical behavior? Does that only happen here? And why do you think it happens here? Yeah, um, those are some of the kind of the strategies
Yeah.
that I've used
And I,
in the past.
and I totally agree. It's, I think the earlier, and I think some of the difficulties that, people sometimes find themselves in is if they've, if behaviours are happening and then it's not being, as you've put it, nipped in the bud early, you can find yourself in a situation where actually then the behaviour itself starts to escalate and gets worse. But if we've not tackled the early things, then we've almost kind of allowed, poor conduct to take place. So that's, so it then becomes a culture of, well, it's all right, we can get away with that. So
Exactly, yeah.
and it gets worse and worse and worse. And actually then when you try and have a conversation with a parent, they'll, sometimes the response that you might get is, well, if you'd have told me about this 6 weeks ago when it started happening, I'd have done something about it. And that becomes quite a difficult and challenging conversation, I think. Whereas if you can kind of nip it really quickly and say, and even sometimes, your strategies around ignoring the tiny little things, but then actually, even being able to say, we don't do that here. That's not how we run ourselves here. So, well, let's get back onto the right track. That kind of conversation. It's just that and it's actually quite a positive reinforcement around, that's not what we do. This is how we do things here at Manchester or wherever you happen to be in the country. It's that positive reinforcement of of good standards and everybody being able to enjoy that experience at that time, which is pretty much what you've kind of, that's why everybody's there. They want to have a good time and they want to be challenged in the sport and develop. And if you've got a couple of individuals that aren't doing that, then it's, that's the conversation, isn't it? But yeah, okay.
I think the point you made there around, like, we have to be really clear about where the red lines are. Okay, so the moment anybody crosses a red line, you have to step in.
Yeah,
You can't let that
absolutely.
go. And yeah, and like what you said about, if you don't step in at the right times, then either the behavior spreads to other people,
Yeah, yeah,
or other people stop respecting you because you're not dealing with a behavior that everybody sees they should be dealt with. Okay. So no, I think, but I mean, I feel, well, I mean, I don't know if it's gonna sound right, but I feel sorry sometimes for younger coaches, because in dealing with these things, it's a lot easier to deal with these when you are when you're in your late 40s, like I am now, than when you are an 18-year-old, coaching a bunch of 12-year-olds, or someone in the mid
yeah.
20s, whether,
Just
So
life.
I think we have to support people. We have to, and that's where the system comes into place, right? Where it's also important that, and again, I don't think we've done a fantastic job with this at our club, and we're looking at this, where all the coaches can feel supported if anything is not going the way they would like it to go, and they're not sure how to deal with it, that they know who to come to. Same for parents and players, that there's a clear sort of communication ladder of, okay, this is not working for me. Who do I go to? who can
Yeah.
help me with this?
Yeah.
I think that's really important because, I mean, we're asking back to the point about being a volunteer. We're asking people to do a lot of things really when they become a coach and or a club official, and sometimes our line of work might have. I'm very lucky because my line of work is very close to these, right? But
Yeah.
we've got coaches at the club that are
Completely different.
builders, joiners, lawyers, IT consultants. Um, it's and we need to support everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's it is about being able to have that discussion, and again, for coaches to be able to develop. But I think again, it's nice to hear you say, it's not perfect at Manchester. It's not perfect anywhere, Sergio. I think I'd really struggle with any club, as I did with in my previous role with schools. Any school that says that we have no issues with behaviour or any problems, it's just not. It's not correct. It isn't correct. But I think, and it's an evolving conversation all the time because things change, players change, and things that are going on in the world change, which have an impact on people. So it's this evolving conversation that I think, if as a club you're willing to have that conversation, that's half the battle. That is half the battle. Let's talk a little bit about, is there anything else? And I know you've already touched, you've more than touched on it really now. Is there anything from a parental involvement kind of angle that you think is useful from your perspective, Sergio?
Yeah. Uh, I'm gonna say this again, right? We have to really stop looking at parents as if they are the enemy. Um, like we are not Obi-Wan Kenobi and the parents are Darth Vader. It's not that, okay? Um, this is always a partnership between the the children, the parents, and ourselves. Um, Hopefully, we all want the same thing, which is for the child to have a great time
Yeah.
and to that's always we have a good time and hopefully get better at basketball, okay? But mainly have a great time and be physically active. Um, and if we don't bring the parents in, we are missing an absolute trick because they're so important. They know their child, they have skills themselves. The parents have lots of skills that we might not know about. And only yesterday, a parent offered, you know what, my line of work is social media. I could help you with some of the
Oh,
stuff.
I am.
And if we hadn't engaged in that conversation, or if we hadn't created an environment where a parent feels they can reach out to you and
Oh,
say,
yeah.
look, this is what I do. Can I help? Um, that's important. For me, the biggest thing is that you can never over communicate with parents.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the issues that come that crop up come because of a lack of communication or miscommunication. An informed parent is a happy parent, and it's a parent that will support you and try to help. Um, so anything we can do to, and you know this from a school's perspective.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we hate these 5-page letters that come from the school, and then you go, "My goodness, have I got time to read these?"
Yeah.
Okay, but it's good to know what's happening.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
is.
good to know what your child is doing in school. It's good to know who to go to if something happens in school. And this is the thing. It's good to know. I mean, I try to make a point always to try and, for example, something simple, create a calendar a month in advance. For yeah, I'm not talking about, for example, coaching this year under 18 Prem National League. So these are kids that are going through the A levels,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
have a lot of commitment, that train a lot, parents that are all over the place. So at least something that everybody knows where they're going to be over the next 4 weeks. When do they need to be here, there? Which games do we have? Blah blah blah. That's just, excuse me. That's just an example of one kind of communication. Okay, that at a more logistical level. For communication at the level of expectation. Okay, this is going to be a challenging year for your son because we're going to have games on a Wednesday, games at the weekend. They're going to train 3 times. Then they're going to have a strength and conditioning here. So it's going to be challenging. This
A
is
lot.
our expectations of them. This is what you can expect from us. This is how we would like you to help us. How can we help you? All of that is fundamental. Because at the very least, even when something goes wrong, put all those steps in place,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
you can identify the problems a lot earlier, but also people will
Respond
for,
better.
respond better and forgive you because you've been proactive, you tried, and people understand, as we've been saying all along, that it's never going to be perfect, that you're gonna screw up at some point, okay, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I think it's relationship building, isn't it? Whether some people call it networking, relationship building, stakeholder engagement, whatever it is that you happen to call it in your field, it is about keeping an open dialogue all the time. And it is the little things like the calendar, that kind of, it just makes, apart from anything else, it makes everybody's life just a bit easier, and that's, if you can make my life easier, then I already like you. That's
Yeah,
it's just a given. And it's it's something that I sometimes terms it's a quick win. It's the little quick wins that you can get that kind of build that trusting relationship, which is what you need. And particularly, a trusting relationship is what you need if then you have to have a slightly more challenging conversation, because you've already got that base there, and it just makes it a whole lot easier. It's far more difficult to have that conversation if there's no relationship, because they're just going to come at you with a kind of attack face, aren't they? And it's, I suppose, again, none of this is really rocket science either. It's just that, as I've said before, behavior and conduct is so emotive sometimes, and sometimes it just happens when you really least need it. And it's, a lot of what we're talking about is still that take a breath, count to at least 5, if not 10, and then then go at it, which are just kind of the positive steps you can take, aren't they?
and that's one of the I mean, we talked earlier about the differences between school and sport. Sport is very emotional,
Yeah, it is.
uh, because for a number of reasons. Right? First, because it means a lot to the kids and their parents. Like, they go to school because they have to go to school.
Yeah,
Right? They come to
I'll
basketball
take
because
that.
they
I'll take
want. No, you know what I mean.
that. I
I work at a university, okay? So, I know that, spending time with me is not my student's dream, okay? They would like to do something else. But they come to the basketball club
They
because
love it.
they love basketball. They love being there. They love playing. They love being there with their friends. They love doing well. They are some of them, a lot of them, rightly or wrongly, care a lot more about doing well in their basketball than doing well in their education. They can take
Yeah.
a setback in school a lot better than a setback in basketball because basketball means a lot to them. And the same goes to the parents. Okay? And I'm speaking now as a parent as well, a parent of 2 children in the basketball club. Um, and and we have to understand that. We have to understand how emotional it can be, how meaningful it is to people, how much they care about it. Um, And if you start with that understanding in mind, you're in a better place. Again, that doesn't excuse bad behavior or justify bad behavior, but it helps you with understanding why people are doing certain things.
And
And if you understand that, then you're starting from a different place. And I
yeah,
think that's important.
and I couldn't agree more, actually. I think it's precisely that. Is it feels different, doesn't it? It feels that it's a very passionate thing. People that get involved in sport and love it, they want to do well. So when it goes wrong, it just means so much more. And I think, again, if we can come at it from that perspective, then it massively helps. It does massively help. Um, I think, I mean, my final point, and I think we've kind of covered it really, in terms of positive steps, whenever you're presented with a situation, from certainly from my perspective, whenever you've had a challenging situation or something hasn't quite gone right, and if you follow all the steps, I think the biggest thing you can ever do with any kind of situation is learn from it. Let's reflect on that situation. What went right? Some of it probably went right. Maybe some of it just, I could have done better, they could have done better, or we could have all done better together. So it's being honest and transparent about that conversation, isn't it? And not being afraid to have that conversation, and hearing things from other people that where they might turn around and say, oh, but I think if you'd have done it this way, it might have ended differently or better. because we're all learning all the time, and people change all the time, things change all the time. So it's not a bad thing. It's a brave thing to be able to kind of take that feedback and learn from it and evolve from it as well. I think would be my take on that, really.
Absolutely. And look, I was just going to say that for me, one big thing is that no coach or no club official is an island, that we need to create support groups within the club. And in that sense, I just wanted to quickly, because it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge certain people that are working really hard at the club to, because I'm here talking to you today, but there's a bunch of people working behind the scenes to improve this all the time. People like Sam Longley, Will Brown, Annette Brown, Peter Paraskiva, people that are constantly looking at this, Ryan Bailey, people that are spending a lot of time really putting the right things in place and supporting other people to create these positive experiences and to help people deal with any sort of behavior, positive, negative,
Yeah,
because as we were saying, it's just such an emotional thing that sometimes good things get turned into bad things and the other way
yeah,
around.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and 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 it is important to have a group of people. I think if anybody feels that they're doing this on their own, my best advice would be try and find a couple of allies in the club that might be, you know, interested in working in this area. Because it's hard to do it on your own.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah,
And I think, I suppose, the flip side of that, and if people are, having difficult situations and just not quite sure, and that can happen, that happens all the time. Then you've also got, us guys, basketball,
absolutely.
pick up the phone, drop an email into the safeguarding integrity box. And we'll be more than happy to, kind of have that conversation. And sometimes I think when I've had those conversations with clubs, actually they have got the answer. They have. They just need somebody to have the conversation with, to say, does this make sense? Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You're completely on the right. And it's just a bit of validation in your own thought process that this is what I think I'm
Yeah.
going to do about it. Does that kind of sound right? It sounds perfectly right. And I think it's not a bad thing to, to have those conversations, because it gives you a bit of, sometimes it can give a bit of confidence, a bit of validation, but it's helpful and it's useful to have those. So not you have got that access for those people that are going to sit and going to listen to us
And I
talk.
can bear witness to that. I mean, I've spoken to you a few times this year
Yeah.
and to Laura, and I've always been super helpful. So I would really encourage people
And that's the
to
right
pick up the
answer,
phone.
Sergio. That's the
It
right
is true, though. It is true.
answer. Okay, Sergio, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's I can't tell you how invaluable it really is to hear it from, somebody who's been around the sport a long time, who's clearly got a huge amount of experience, both in your day and your night job, in terms of this kind of area that we've spoken about. But thank you so much, Sergio. It'll be interesting to talk to you again, and if we get further questions from people that have listened to us talk for what is nearly an hour now, actually, time has flown. Then I shall come back at you and we'll get you to answer some more questions. But once again, Sergio, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you so much.